Welcome everyone to MHPN's February webinar. My name is Xiaohanbao Smith. I will be your moderator today, and we will be hearing about bridging policy and community, a case study in resilient preservation governance. And before I turn it over to our speaker today, I will go over some Zoom items. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box as you think of them. All the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. And the chat box will be used to share links or resources discussed during the webinar. Both the chat box and Q&A box are located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you don't see them, please wiggle your mouse and they should pop up. If this is your first time attending our webinar, we are the Michigan Historic Preservation Network. We support the sustainability and economic viability of Michigan's historic places through advocacy, education, and direct action. We could not do the work we do without our members and volunteers. So if you're not a member yet, please consider joining us at www.mhpn.org. And we have an exciting announcement, and we are very excited to invite you to MHPN Spring On-Site Party. And we hope that you could join us on Thursday, March 12th at 5:30 p.m. at the residence at Walter French, located at 1900 South Cedar Street in Lansing, Michigan. And this is a casual pop-up event, and we will explore the adaptive reuse of a former school that has been thoughtfully transformed into modern housing. And during this event, we will hear directly from the project team in a Q&A session and take guided tour of the facility and enjoy appetizers and drinks together. The cost is $50 per person. And we want to say a special thank you to our hosts, the Capital Area Housing Partnership. And we hope you can join us, and I will send this information to the chat in a minute. And if you are seeking AICP credits for this webinar, I have the information for the course number here, and I will send this information to the chat box too. And you will need to log in your credits online afterwards using this link. And if you are seeking AIA credits, please send me your name and AIA number through email. I will also send my email to the chat box. And our webinars are supported in part by an award from the Michigan Arts and Culture Council and National Endowment for the Arts. We want to say a big thank you to our sponsors. And it is my great pleasure today to introduce you our speaker, Cheryl Donaldson. Cheryl is a PhD student in public administration and public policy at the University of Texas at Arlington, specializing in historic preservation governance. And she also served on the City of Arlington's Landmark Preservation Commission and the board of the Arlington Historical Society. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Cheryl. Cheryl, please go ahead and share your screen.
Hey, thank you, Zahan. I really appreciate that. And thank all of you for joining me today. My topic today is on bridging policy and community, a case study in resilient preservation governance. It's an honor to be here today with other preservation professionals and advocates. I want to thank the Michigan Historic Preservation Network for allowing me this time to share a little bit of Texas with y'all, you people in Michigan and elsewhere. This session is meant to be a case-based conversation about process. It's not a prescriptive model. I am interested in sharing what's emerging in Arlington, Texas, and hearing how similar governance challenges show up elsewhere. This case references information publicly available through the City of Arlington, Texas's Landmark Preservation Commission meeting minutes, which are critical tools for transparency and accountability in preservation governance. I will let you know I have 3 small polls as part of this session. right, for the first poll, I would like to know what best describes your role. You know, are you coming in to this session today? Are you a Preservation Commission member, planning or zoning staff, a preservation professional or consultant, a community advocate, a nonprofit, a student or researcher, or something totally different?
And Cheryl, I have the first and second poll on the same, launched at the same time. So if you would like to talk about the second poll too, then we can look at the results together.
Okay. And for the second poll, I wanted to know where everyone is joining us from today. Are you in Michigan, Texas, somewhere else in the Midwest that's not Michigan, somewhere else in the South that's not Texas? Do we have anyone from the East Coast, the West Coast, or did we get anyone international here today?
Okay, just in a minute, we will share the results. Just give everybody another minute to participate.
Okay.
Okay, now you can see the results on the screen.
All right, so we have a good mix of people and a good mix of locations. I'm glad to hear it. All right. All right. So about this session, today I wanted to talk to you about the Landmark Preservation Commission for the City of Arlington, Texas is currently undergoing collaboration with the city in an attempt to acquire a landmark preservation overlay for the Knapp Heritage Park. The Knapp Heritage Park is significant not just because it contains three of the oldest surviving structures in Arlington, but because it represents an early civic landscape, education, domestic life, and community gathering. And it's preserved within a rapidly growing city. That combination makes it an ideal site for examining how preservation governance functions under development pressure. The Knapp Heritage Park sits within close proximity to major entertainment districts and a rapidly growing university. This proximity creates both opportunity and pressure, making coordinated governance essential to ensure that historic sites remain protected as cities grow. Before we talk about governance, I think it's important to understand where this site is located, especially since most of you are not from Texas. Arlington, Texas sits at the heart of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. You may hear it called it DFW occasionally. And it's positioned directly between the cities of Dallas and Fort Worth. In the city of Arlington, the Knapp Heritage Park is located in downtown Arlington, and it's embedded within a thriving entertainment and civic district. The site is just steps away from Arlington City Hall. We're only separated by a railroad track and a parking lot, and then you're right there. It's in close proximity to the University of Texas at Arlington, which is historically known as a commuter university that currently has over 43,000 students. We're minutes away from major regional destinations, including the Dallas Cowboys Stadium. And yes, the Dallas Cowboys Stadium is in Arlington, Texas, not in Dallas, Texas. We're next to the Texas Rangers ballpark, as well as Six Flags Over Texas, which is the flagship park for the Six Flags chain. This proximity means that Knapp is not isolated nor protected by distance. Instead, it exists within continuous development pressure, making it an ideal case for examining how preservation governance functions in a high-growth urban environment. Why does this matter beyond Arlington, Texas? I want to pause here and step back from Arlington specifically because what's happening at the Knapp Heritage Park isn't unique, it's just very visible. Because Arlington does sit at the midpoint of the DFW Metroplex, it is a regional destination rather than a bedroom community. This is common for many other cities as well. Arlington being the host of multiple major entertainment districts, a rapidly growing public university, and large-scale tourism infrastructure, all of which brings economic opportunities, but can also cause constant redevelopment pressures. What this means for preservation is that historic sites aren't threatened by neglect. They are instead threatened by success. As cities grow, preservation doesn't fail because people don't care. However, preservation could fail if governance structures aren't equipped to manage competing priorities. These pressures are not unique to Arlington. They mirror conditions in many mid-sized cities experiencing growth without integrated preservation authorities. So why does growth changes preservation? Because it is a regional destination for tourism and entertainment, because it is a rapidly growing university less than 2 miles from the location. We're in the middle of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, which is a high growth Metroplex. And then there's continuous redevelopment. You'll find that growth doesn't kill preservation, but unmanaged growth does kill preservation. And growth doesn't threaten preservation by itself. Uncoordinated governance does threaten it. So who is this information for? I think this information is for local preservation commissions in every city, planners and municipal staff, advocates and community historians, and anyone working without clear preservation tools. Even if you've never heard of Arlington, Texas, the governance challenges that I'm describing will be very familiar to everyone. What preservation looks like without governance. In many communities, preservation work begins with passion. That's essential. But passion alone doesn't create protection. We often see advocacy without authority, designation without durability, and engagement without enforcement. Without governance tools, preservation becomes reactive rather than resilient. This is where the burnout happens, when volunteers and advocates carry responsibility without having the necessary institutional backing. This isn't a critique of people or organizations. It's a critique of systems that rely on goodwill instead of structure. This is the point where Arlington is now. We are attempting to move from symbolic recognition to binding tools. The challenge, coordinating preservation in Arlington, Texas. So how does the Planning Office, the Landmark Preservation Commission, and the City Council coordinate so that a site like the Knapp Heritage Park can thrive for generations? What does it take for a historic site to survive, not just as a landmark, but as a resilient part of its community? Arlington's historic sites often rely on volunteer care and local passion, but lasting protection depends on governance. In Arlington, Texas, historic preservation lives at the intersection of those three bodies: the planning staff, the Landmark Preservation Commission, and City Council. Each group plays a legitimate but different role: technical review, public legitimacy, and legal authority. So the challenge isn't disagreement, it's alliance. These bodies operate on different timelines, answer to different constituencies, and interpret preservation through different lenses. So the question then becomes, how do we move from parallel efforts to coordinated actions? And this is where preservation efforts often stall, not because anyone disagrees about the value of history, but because coordination breaks down. In Arlington, our planning staff, the Landmark Preservation Commission, and City Council each operate within their own mandates and timeline. Planning is often responding to development pressures and permitting schedules. The Landmark Preservation Commission is advisory and reactive, engaging when applications come forward. And City Council operates at a policy and political level. Without formal coordination mechanisms, preservation decisions can fall into silos. The preservation staff may not know when to involve the LPC. The LPC may learn about changes too late in the process, and accountability becomes diffuse. No single body is clearly responsible for protecting resources beyond individual designations. This is not a failure of intent. It is instead a structural problem. And this is where a landmark preservation overlay becomes critical. Overlays move preservation from symbolic recognition to binding protection. Rather than relying on individual designations or informal coordination, overlays embed preservation requirements directly into zoning and land use policies. Overlays clarify expectations for the staff, for the residents, and for developers by making preservation review predictable rather than discretionary. Importantly, overlays survive leadership turnover. They do not depend on who happens to be on the commission or who is staffing a department or who is currently holding an office. In a fast-growing city like Arlington, overlays create durability. They ensure that preservation functions as part of the governance infrastructure, not as an after-the-fact reaction. So in Arlington, this is an example of how the city's preservation system works. So if someone wants to do a demolition or renovation, et cetera, they would submit an application to the planning department. So the planning department would provide technical guidance. Then the Landmark Preservation Commission, we will review that and make recommendations. And then the city council will make the final designation decision. Public input flows through every stage of this process. So we always have the public involved in this process. When that collaboration works, policy becomes protection because resilience emerges at the overlaps and not in the individual boxes. So I think it's important to understand that community engagement is not a consensus. Engagement does not mean it's agreement. Transparency does not mean it's approval. And process legitimacy does not mean outcome satisfaction. And these lessons apply far beyond Arlington. They are about how any local government can make preservation part of its civic fabric. Another category of heritage that raised similar governance questions is historic signage and corridors. Preservation beyond buildings also requires governance tools that addresses linear, dispersed, and vulnerable resources. When we think about historic preservation, we often default to buildings or structures. But in practice, preservation increasingly involves resources that don't fit neatly into a building-based framework. Things like landscapes, trees, signs, and historic corridors. These resources are often dispersed, highly vulnerable, and fall outside of traditional commission authority. That means their protection depends less on designation and more on how governance systems coordinate across the departments. Example, heritage and marker trees, they represent a different kind of historic resource, one that is living, evolving, and often culturally sensitive. In Texas, some trees are recognized through organizations like the Texas Historic Tree Coalition. I'm a member of that as well. But they lack formal municipal protection mechanisms. These trees raise governance questions more than designation questions. Some things to consider are: who has the authority? Who has the responsibility? And how do we protect without overexposing or commodifying? This is where preservation intersects with restraint and where collaboration matters more than control. So living landscapes, these raise governance questions, not answers in this situation. So some examples, Native American tribes, they use trees as trail markers for hunting and to mark where water resources were located and for different reasons. Also, the Cross Timbers Forest, it stretched from Kansas through Oklahoma and into Texas. And it was this forest of oak trees that was the largest timbered barrier west of the Mississippi River. And due to its denseness, it was also called the cast iron forest. And making way for wayward expansion, urban growth, and railroad has caused a drastic reduction in that forest. The trees remaining are old, beautiful, and they are witnesses to the growth of the United States. In Arlington, we also are part of the historic Bankhead Highway, which once ran through the city, shaping development, commerce, and movement. The Bankhead Highway was the first highway to span the United States. It was connecting Washington, D.C. to San Diego, California. The section of the Bankhead Highway that's in Arlington is now known as Division Street, and so it's still part of that route. Now, while many physical traces have disappeared, some historic signs remain as important markers of that legacy. Like heritage trees, these resources are dispersed, vulnerable, and often fall outside of traditional preservation authority, making them governance challenges rather than purely technical ones. What's important here is not the specific resource, but the shared issue, how preservation systems adapt when heritage does not fit neatly into building-based frameworks. And we tend to overlook the non-structural historic resources, such as the trees and corridors and landscapes. So some examples of well-known historic signs, think about the Hollywood sign, right? That's a historic sign. Route 66 road signs. And the Bankhead Highway used to be called the Route 66 of the South. So, and think about landscapes. There are multiple battlegrounds from the Civil War all through the United States, like Gettysburg, right? And there are some other, other ones as well. And then think about ecosystems like the marshlands in New Orleans, where the size of those marshlands have drastically reduced due to human intervention for flood control and oil and gas use. Now, these examples are not about adding responsibility tomorrow. They just illustrate why existing governance tools are being stretched. So that brings us to the third poll. And so I want to know in your community, which non-building resources create the biggest preservation challenges? So is it landscapes and parks, heritage or marker trees if they apply to you, historic corridors or signage, archaeological resources? Do you primarily focus on buildings, or are you not sure, or it's still emerging?
Yeah, we will give another 30 seconds for people to participate.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to end poll right now and share the results.
So I would say, but thank you for the feedback on that. For the people who primarily focus on buildings, I would say take a look around your community, see what else. This is a new venture for our Landmark Preservation Commission. So it's something that's still in the works for us as well. So we are expanding our reach. Now, I intentionally mentioned trees, signage, and overlays and procedural details not to expand preservation endlessly, but to show why collaboration matters. Overlays move preservation from recognition to regulation by embedding protections directly into zoning and land use policy. In a fast-growing city like Arlington, preservation only works when responsibilities are clearly defined, the processes are coordinated across the departments, and the protections are embedded in the policy rather than dependent on individuals or informal relationships. All three of the historic structures at the Knapp Heritage Park currently have individual historic markers. By coordinating with the city to place the entire park under a landmark preservation overlay, Arlington can extend the protection beyond the individual structures to the broader historic landscape, providing safeguards not only for those existing resources, but also for any future structures that may be introduced within the park. This shift from site-specific designation to landscape scale protection is what allows preservation to function as a resilient planning strategy rather than as a reactive one. So when I think about governance coordination, ongoing discussions between the Landmark Preservation Commission and our planning department has clarified when and how the Landmark Preservation Commission becomes involved in preservation-related reviews. Process refinement. The LPC formally engaged planning staff and city council to clarify its advisory role and to ensure preservation considerations were integrated earlier in the decision-making and not after losses had already occurred. And this resulted in an update to the demolition permit application process, which it now triggers LPC review if a structure is over 50 years old, thereby embedding preservation review into the routine planning workflows. The landmark preservation overlay is useful here, not because of its specific regulatory provisions, but because it represents an attempt to institutionalize preservation values within the broader planning framework. This process of pursuing an overlay, whether for a community area such as the Knapp Heritage Park, a singular structure, a sign, or a living landscape, through commission discussion, planning staff analysis, public records, and elected review, that in itself is a test of government resilience. So, what can other communities do on Monday morning? Right. So the first step toward resilient preservation is clarity. Communities need to map out decision authority. Who is actually responsible for what? Is preservation housed in a commission, within planning, within parks, a nonprofit partners, right? It may look different from everybody. In many cities, landscape elements like heritage trees, historic signage, or cultural corridors fall under different departments. Mapping that structure out helps identify gaps, prevent duplication, and avoid unintended losses. Preservation weakens when authority is unclear. Second, make the processes visible. Transparency builds durability. Public meetings, published meetings, and clearly defined review triggers create predictability. When processes are visible, preservation decisions become institutional rather than personality driven. That visibility builds trust and resilience over time. Third, formalize those staff and commission relationships. Informal collaboration is helpful, but formalized collaboration is resilient. Staff expertise, commission oversight, that function best when the roles are clearly defined and integrated into the policy framework. Moving from conversation to codification is where preservation gains strength. Finally, treat engagement as an infrastructure. Engagement should not be episodic or crisis-driven. It should function like infrastructure, built into how decisions are made, not added after a conflict emerges. In Arlington, landmark preservation overlays serve as an example of this structural approach. The city has used LPOs in other contexts, and expanding that tool to the Knapp Heritage Parks represents a strategic effort to protect historic landscapes, not just individual structures. As I mentioned before, all three of the historic buildings within the Knapp Heritage Park already have individual historic markers. Recognition is important, but overlays move preservation from recognition to regulation by embedding protections into zoning and land use policy. That shift from site-specific to landscape-scale protection is what allows preservation to function as a resilient planning strategy rather than as the reactive one. Preservation becomes resilient when it is embedded into systems not dependent on goodwill. So, a closing reflection. My current service on the Landmark Preservation Commission is my second tenure in this role. That perspective allows me to see the process not only as a resident and a commissioner, but also through the lens of a governance researcher as I pursue my PhD in public administration and public policy. What I have observed over time is a measurable shift from collaboration between staff, commission, council, and community. It is not perfect, but it is progressing in a direction that reflects intentional coordination rather than isolated decision-making. In a fast-growing city like Arlington, that really does matter. Resilience and preservation is not just about the bricks or the boards. It is about relationships, clarity of roles, and policy structures strong enough to outlast individual leaderships. When we bridge policy and community, we do more than protect buildings. We create heritage that endures. Now, I speak to you today both as a commissioner and a preservation governance researcher. I don't present this model to replicate, but as a conversation starter. Every community has different governance structures, political realities, and growth pressures. What I hope this case study offers is a way to think about how collaboration can be embedded structurally and not just relationally, right? I genuinely welcome anyone to continue discussion about how these ideas might translate or challenge your own local context. So my goal is not to prescribe solutions, but to surface how institutional design shapes preservation outcomes. And I have on here, there's my email. I'll put my LinkedIn, and the QR code is a link to my faculty website at the university.
Thank you, Cheryl, for your presentation. And so, yeah, if you didn't have a chance to write down Cheryl's contact information, we will have follow-up emails. And you could always ask me to give you the email address.
Now, I want to thank the Michigan Historic Preservation Network for allowing me to come visit today, and I want to thank everyone from joining across the region for coming out today.
Thank you so much. We are so glad that we have you today. So let's go into the Q&A session. We have a few questions here, and everybody feel free to type in your questions. So we're going to start. The first question is, why does the city council hold the authority to approve rehabilitation plans, but not the planning commission?
All right, that's a good question. And I think it's just different in every city. For the structure of our city, it just so happens that we do have that's the way the process is. When something comes through the city, it goes through the city council for final approval.
Okay, thank you. Next question. So Michigan has over 70 communities that have approved their own protection ordinances under Public Act 169 of 1970. However, many are based on survey and documentations that's decades old. Do you have any suggestions on how we could convince community to start by bringing their baseline data up to date?
I think it would depend on, again, how the structure is. I know with Arlington, our Arlington Historical Society is very involved in the process that we have going on with the Landmark Preservation Commission. And with me, myself, being a board member, being on the commission, and we do have the director of our historic society is also on the commission. The members of our commission are appointed by city council. So those are appointments that come in. But we are currently reviewing inventory, if you will, to see how we update those databases. And that is something we have a staff member on the Landmark Preservation Commission who is part of the planning office. And we coordinate with that office regularly to make sure that we are starting to update things. And that's one of the processes that we're getting started now is to update our data because sometimes it does get outdated, and that's something that needs to be done regularly. But I think getting your community involved. So if you don't have your historic society or whatever advocacy group as part of your commission or involved like that, to reach out to them to start the process. So we have the Historic Society, and then members of leadership from the Texas Historic Tree Coalition have also been in contact with me. They would like to be involved in different processes that we could do as our commission starts taking on living landscapes.
Okay, thank you. I think there's a comment in the chat saying that cemeteries and maintenance of historic grave markers are a challenge. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions on that?
Say that again. I don't see the
It
can you
is
say
in
that
the
again?
chat box. Yeah, it's in the chat box. The cemeteries and maintenance of historic grave markers are a challenge. Do you have any experience that you would share?
So our cemeteries, we have the Arlington Historical Society. It consists of three different things. It's the Knapp Heritage Park, the Fielder House Museum, as well as our historic cemeteries. And so the Arlington Historic Society is actually involved in that process. I know we recently went out and we did some GPS to locate missing graves and things like that in one of our more historic parks. And so our historic society is more involved in that than the Landmark Preservation Commission because it currently does not fall under the LPC purview.
And next question. I think those two questions are kind of related. So the first question says, so what are your thoughts about penalties or the possibility of penalties to support compliance? And then there's another question talking about, so could you be more specific on how Arlington addresses demolition of historic resources? So this is from Steve, and Steve said in their city they have a 5,000 fine for unapproved demolition, which is small peanuts, not a deterrent.
Yes, and so do you want my answer or the politically correct answer? So those are two different answers. Um, I think there should be penalties. I think there should be significant penalties. It's not something that we regularly encounter. So if anything historic gets demolished in Arlington that we have found out about, they have gone through the proper procedures, and it just so happened that it was approved. We haven't had anyone that has been in violation of that, to my knowledge, but I know we are working on plans to make some of the Landmark Preservation Commission, because right now our recommendations are non-binding. So somebody could come in and say, I want to demolish the Taj Mahal, or something. And then we could say, no, you can't demolish the Taj Mahal. And it's just a suggestion. So it's non-binding. We make a recommendation and then, it goes to city council for final approval. So we do have the process is in place, but we are looking for more binding processes in that. And that's what we're hoping for so that we can say, if this happens, these are the penalties that go along with it. I think we've been very fortunate that we haven't had people just out there destroying historic properties. So that's just not something we've encountered.
Thank you. Next question. So, when getting all parties aligned, where have you found the weakest link?
In getting the parties aligned, I haven't found a weakest linked. If I can target something that what I would consider the weakest, it would be from my first tenure on the LPC to now the experience on my second tenure of the LPC. I believe that the way we are currently, that we're a bit more outspoken. We're asking for things. The city has been, the planning department and the city has been very receptive to the things that we have asked for. So we have not run into any barriers with that. So I think it was the commission was a little bit more relaxed before, and now we're taking a more proactive stance, and we're trying to build our I don't want to say powers. We're trying to build our structure so that we have more binding powers. I mean, the power is the word. I guess that's the word I have to use. But I think we've been very fortunate, and all cities may not experience the same thing. I think we have in the planning department and on our city council people who embrace preservation. So I know that they probably have to struggle with the economic growth that they're going to, those other constituencies that they have to deal with, but they have been very receptive to things that we have asked for, and we have not had to experience that problem. We just had to ask for it. And most of the time it's yes, but if it's not formal, if it's not a formal agreement, then it's just dealing with when another group comes in, would it be the same thing? And that's why it's so important to have these policies in place, that they are enforced and not just a handshake and a nod, right? Did that answer your question?
Okay, thank you. Next question. Where does education come in for aligning all those with responsibilities for resource protection? And where does that responsibility land?
That responsibility, actually, it does not have a clear place yet. That's one of the things that we are working on, because, like I said, different things have different responsibilities. And with the Landmark Preservation Commission, structures fall under us. His corridors fall under Parks Department. Signs, I think, just under that's probably planning. So we have been working on education. We've made a series of educational videos that we have on our website for the Landmark Preservation Commission. The Arlington Historical Society does educational series, and the the Chamber of Commerce has also been involved in making sure that they make it part of their website so that they get the outreach more out there. So I think that's probably something we have to shore up, to say where that responsibility is going to lie. but it's right now it's in different places, but it's a group effort and everybody's actually doing their part.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Um, what is the appeal process for property owners who wish to challenge a city council decision in Texas? In Michigan, appeals are through a administrative law judge at the state level, then subject to review by the State Historic Preservation Review Board.
So if it's I want to answer this correctly. So if someone does like a demolition or a rental permit, if it's 50 years or older, it triggers the Landmark Preservation Commission review. So then it comes to us for review, and we have different options. So we can release it to say, so we'll review that. We review um, the history of the property to see if there's any historic significance to it. If it's something that we feel will be missed in, as part of our historic landscape, then we make a decision on that. So we decide if we want to release it so that it can go ahead, or we could put a stay on it. So I'm going to start with the preservation. I know you asked about the council level. I'll get there. So we can do a stay, and we can do a stay up to like 90 days. And in those 90 days, we usually, if it comes down to that, we're talking to the people, even though our decision is non-binding, we're talking to the people involved, and we may say, well, I know you want to do this, but this is what, we're asking for. And I know, like, with the university has several historic buildings, and um, we have no responsibility for any of those. But the university has been good with us, and we say, okay, they're going to tear down this building. It's a historic building. What a historic landmark. What part can we keep that we can still honor that structure, even if it leaves? We just had a big development with Viridian that has come to our city, and they got a large plot of land, and it's in an area that used to be known as Bird's Fort. And um, even though they didn't have to, we talked to the Viridian people, and they did a historic kind of pedestal to mark that it was a historic space. So if we do the stay for the 90 days, then we have to come up with a solution. So um, if we're saying that we want to keep this structure, we would can find a place to take it. So if the Knapp Heritage Park is a reasonable place to take it, then we would have to arrange that to move the structure to a different location, so it's not on that person's property anymore, in order to preserve that. But even if we say, and if it comes past the 90 days and we're not able to do that, then it moves forward in the process, in the demolition process. And then it goes to city council, and city council has our recommendation, and then they would follow through with whether they're going to allow it or not allow it. If they say that it's allowed, it moves forward in its process. And if they say no, I don't know that anyone has challenged our city council decision before. And I don't want to give any incorrect information on that, but what I would like to ask is that if you will reach out to me, that's something that I can look up, and I can provide you with that information.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What is the median age of the houses in Arlington, Texas?
I'm trying to see how old I am. All right, so I believe a majority of the houses were built in the 1950s. So the median age is actually skewing because we're getting a lot of new builds coming in, because not just the entertainment district, which it's bringing in a lot of um, people wanting to put in apartment complexes and things like that in order to accommodate people coming to the Cowboy Stadium or the Rex Ranger Stadium. So we having all these people coming in, but then also with the university growing, and the university was traditionally a commuter school, but it's becoming a more of a residential school. And so, excuse me, additional um, buildings are being put up, apartment complexes to be available for incoming students are being built up. So we're getting a lot of new builds coming up. So right now, around the 1950s, but I see that skewing in the future.
Thank you. I also see a couple of questions in the chat box. So how often is historic building use considered a historic resource to be governed by an overlay ordinance?
We don't currently have a use policy on it.
Perhaps other participants could answer that question in the chat. Okay, so next question. What advice would you give to a planning commission regarding creating landmark overlay districts as they update their master plans?
Oh, let's see. I would say be open-minded, and like I said, we're very fortunate that our planning department is very open-minded and preservation positive. And so I would say, I don't think the sale is with the planning department. Honestly, I think for a landmark preservation overlay, the sale is with the owner. Because if a property has a historic marker, you're just identifying this as having some significant historic value. But if you have a landmark preservation overlay, now you are putting the Landmark Preservation Commission has binding authority over what happens on that property. So the one because it's in our minutes, I'll mention it. One that came up recently was someone had bought a property and they wanted to tear down the structure that was on there. It was under historic preservation overlay. And so we were like, no. Like, so we, look at what condition it's in, and we work with the owner to try to find alternatives of what they can do in order to preserve this structure. And so then they came back and they were wanting to they were like, okay, we'll keep it, but we want to make these changes to it. And I believe it was colonial. It was a colonial build. And they were wanting to use uh, colors that were not consistent with the architecture of the building. And so then we were able to work with them to tell them what we would approve as far as that. So I think when you're going from a marker to a preservation overlay, again, the sale is not with the planning department, the sale is with the owner, because now I own this property and you're telling me what I can and cannot do with it, right? And so that's when it becomes a little bit more challenging going from to introduce a preservation overlay. With the Knapp Heritage Park, we're not going to have that problem. But when we're dealing with residential structures, then the owners are not going to want to as freely give up the power to make decisions on what they do to their house.
Okay, thank you. I think I see one last question. So it says our Michigan SHPO does a very rigorous 5-year master planning process with all interested parties around the state. The state of the Texas SHPO must be doing the same thing to qualify for their historic preservation funding. Do you feel this could become an especially strong ingredient for education statewide?
I think it could become, strong for education statewide. I think right now, most historic preservation in Texas is done on the city level. It's not so much as a state thing because we do have, it depends on the marker that they get. So you may be talking about a different marker. So we have the city markers and then we have state level markers. So with this, we're right now we're focusing on our city markers to say, it's for the city of Arlington. This is a historic landmark, but then we can also petition to have it done at the state level, and so that is a different funding source, and so that's not something that we're regularly involved with. It's a bigger everything's bigger in Texas. It's a bigger body than what we are.
Hey. Okay, and there's a comment says, thanks, Cheryl. And the best takeaway from your presentation is to map the power structure affecting preservation before you get started. And everyone needs to see it. And
And thank you for that comment because I think that is very important because that's some of the things that we've been working on. Like I said, we right now our commission, the primary focus is structures, buildings, houses, commercial or residential. And so as we've started running into signage on uh, the Bankhead Highway and elsewhere in the city, as we started discussing heritage trees and Indian marker trees that's in the area, then now we're having to look to say, who's actually in charge of this? And I think it's very important to map that out. And so we're trying to determine now is if they become under the purview of the Landmark Preservation Commission, or if they stay where they are now, and we coordinate with those organizations. And so we're still trying to work that out as well. But it's important to know because trees are going to fall under parks, signs falls under planning. So it's important to try to find out where everything is located.
okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Cheryl, for your presentation, for answering those questions, and thank you everyone for participating in our webinar. This webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to access it afterwards and share it with people who you think might benefit from it. The recording will be available in a couple of days, and you will receive an email from me when it is available. And please participate in the survey and help us improve our webinar program. And our next webinar is yet to be announced. Please follow our website for our future webinars, workshops, and events. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Hope to see you all next time. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Cheryl.